The day began like any other. The sun was warm, but not too hot, casting golden light across the neighborhood streets. Children laughed in the distance, playing basketball near the corner, while cars rolled slowly along the road. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day when nothing unusual is expected to happen. The young, black youth walked with his backpack slung over one shoulder. He had just finished school and was taking the familiar route home. Earbuds tucked into his ears, music playing softly, he moved at an easy pace. His favorite songs helped him escape into his own world, where the problems of the day faded and all that mattered was the rhythm in his ears. His clothes were simple jeans, hoodie, and sneakers. His backpack was filled with books and papers, the usual weight of a student's life. To him, this was just another afternoon walk, something he had done countless times before. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't nervous, and he certainly wasn't thinking that trouble might find him. The neighborhood was alive with ordinary sights. A mother pushed a stroller past him, offering a polite smile. A man watered his front lawn, waving as the boy passed. The youth nodded back politely, as he always did. He was known in the area, a quiet kid, respectful, not one to cause trouble. People liked him, trusted him. To them, he was just another hard-working student making his way home as he walked. He thought about the small things teenagers often think about homework that needed finishing. The game he wanted to watch later, maybe even what his mom would cook for dinner. His life, like his steps, felt predictable and safe. But life often has a way of shifting in moments, when we least expect it. He reached into his pocket to adjust his phone, scrolling quickly to find another track. The music switched, and he smiled faintly, nodding his head to the beat. For him, music was more than sound, it was freedom. It was the escape from the pressures of school, the stares he sometimes got, the assumptions people made about him. Music was the space where nobody judged him. He crossed the street carefully, the traffic light blinking red for cars. A breeze rustled through the trees, lifting the edges of his hoodie. He inhaled deeply, the scent of freshly cut grass mixing with the faint smell of street food from a vendor a few blocks down. He imagined stopping there, maybe grabbing a snack before heading home to anyone watching. He was simply a young man walking peaceful, harmless, lost in his own little world. But not everyone who watched saw him that way, too. Police officers sat in their patrol car a short distance away. Their eyes caught him as he crossed the street. To them, his hoodie looked suspicious. His slow walk looked unusual. His skin color spoke louder than the books in his backpack or the music in his ears. The youth didn't notice them at first. He kept walking, unaware of the watchful eyes following him. He stopped for a moment near a convenience store, pulling out a small notebook from his bag to check something he had scribbled down earlier. He flipped through a few pages, then tucked it back safely. To him, it was nothing. But to the officers, sitting behind tinted glass, it was another reason to doubt him. He had no idea that his ordinary afternoon was about to twist into something unforgettable. The sidewalk stretched ahead, lined with familiar houses, each one with its own small story. He could already see his neighborhood in the distance, and his pace quickened slightly at the thought of reaching home. The safety of his room, the comfort of dinner with family, that was what waited for him. But before he could reach that comfort, his world would shift. The ordinary rhythm of his walk, the peace of his music. The calm of his day would be interrupted by flashing lights, harsh voices, and the heavy weight of unfair judgment. In that moment, though he didn't know any of this, he was just a young man on a normal afternoon, walking the same streets he had always walked. His mind on simple things, his heart at ease. He didn't know that within minutes, his life would collide with the harshness of authority, and his innocence would be tested in front of strangers. For him, it was still just another day. For the world watching soon, it would become a story. The youth was only a few blocks from home when the world around him shifted. The familiar rhythm of his music filled his ears, but then a sound cut through a sharp noise he couldn't ignore. It was the short chirp of a police siren, not the long, blaring cry of an emergency, but the quick signal meant for one person only. Stop. At first, he thought it wasn't for him. He kept walking, his steps steady, his eyes on the cracked sidewalk. But then the sound came again, louder this time. He turned his head slightly and saw the patrol car pulling up beside him, its lights flickering red and blue against the afternoon sun. His stomach dropped. The car slowed to a crawl, matching his pace. The tinted window rolled down, and one of the officers leaned out, his face stern. "Hey, you. Stop right there." The boy froze. His music kept playing faintly, but his heartbeat was louder now. He pulled out his earbuds slowly, unsure of what he had done. His mind raced through possibilities. Had he jaywalked? Was his backpack unzipped? Why were they stopping him? He hadn't broken any rules. He knew that. Yet the sight of those flashing lights, the sound of that commanding voice, carried a weight he couldn't ignore. The second officer stepped out of the car, his boots hitting the pavement with a heavy thud. He adjusted his belt, his hand brushing against the holster at his hip, a gesture that wasn't necessary but was meant to intimidate. The first officer followed, slamming the door shut behind him. "Where are you going?" the taller one demanded. His tone wasn't curious. It was sharp, accusing. "Home," the youth answered softly, his voice respectful but trembling. "Home." The officer repeated, his eyebrow raised as if the word itself was suspicious. "What's in the bag?" "My school books," the boy said. The shorter officer stepped closer, circling him like a predator. "You look nervous," he said with a smirk. "Why are you nervous?" "Because you stopped me," the boy admitted honestly. The officers exchanged a glance, the kind that carried unspoken judgment. To them, his honesty wasn't innocence, it was guilt. One of them laughed under his breath. These kids always have an excuse. Passers-by began to notice. A man walking his dog slowed down, watching carefully. A woman with grocery bags stood across the street, her eyes narrowing in concern. But no one dared step closer. They all knew what could happen if someone interfered. The taller officer stepped forward, his shadow falling over the boy. "Empty the bag." Now, the boy hesitated. Not because he had anything to hide, his backpack was filled with notebooks, a pencil case, and a half-eaten sandwich, but because the demand felt unfair. Still, he obeyed. His fingers shook slightly as he unzipped the bag and pulled out the contents one by one, placing them on the hood of the patrol car. Books, papers, pens. Nothing else. The officers glanced at each other again, unimpressed but not satisfied. The shorter one flipped through the notebooks carelessly, letting pages flutter in the wind. He sneered. "Math homework. Real dangerous." The taller one wasn't laughing. He leaned closer, his eyes hard. "Why were you walking with your hood up?" The boy blinked. "It's just my hoodie." "I wasn't. Don't talk back," the officer snapped, cutting him off. The boy swallowed his words. His throat tightened. He wanted to say more, to defend himself, but every instinct told him to stay quiet. He had seen enough stories, heard enough warnings. Silence was safer, but silence didn't protect him from their eyes. Their gazes still searched him, scanning for anything that would justify the stop. To them, his skin color, his age, his hoodie, and his silence were already enough. The boy shifted uncomfortably. The weight of the stares from both the officers and the bystanders pressing down on him. What had started as a normal walk home now felt like a stage, with him as the unwilling actor in a cruel performance. The shorter officer chuckled again, shaking his head. "Innocent, huh? We'll see about that." The boy lowered his eyes to the ground, gripping the straps of his empty bag. The flashing lights reflected in the puddle at his feet, red and blue, mixing like warning signs. His chest tightened with frustration and fear. He had done nothing wrong, yet here he was, treated like a criminal. And in that moment, with everyone watching, one thought burned in his mind. If only they knew who my family was. If only they knew who they were dealing with. But for now, he stayed silent. The stop had only begun. The books lay scattered across the hood of the patrol car, pages fluttering in the light breeze. His backpack, emptied and turned inside out, dangled from the officer's hand like a piece of trash. The young boy stood frozen, his hands stiff by his sides, his chest rising and falling with nervous breaths. He had done everything they asked. He had stopped when told. He had emptied his bag. He had spoken with respect. Yet their eyes still cut into him, sharp and suspicious, as if he were guilty of a crime no one could name. The taller officer circled him slowly, his boots heavy against the pavement. "You hanging around here for a reason?" he asked. His tone wasn't curious. It was accusatory, like he had already decided the answer. "I'm just walking home," the boy replied softly, his voice almost lost in the air. "Home," the officer repeated, mocking the word. "Where's home?" "Show me." The boy hesitated. Giving his address felt personal, invasive. But under the harsh gaze of the officer, he forced himself to answer. "It's just a few blocks away," he said, nodding toward the street ahead. The shorter officer laughed, a low, dismissive chuckle. "A few blocks away, huh? That's what they all say." Wandering around, looking for trouble, he picked up one of the notebooks, flipping through the pages. "You write anything in here I should know about?" "Plans, gang signs." "What's this mathsome kind of code?" The boy's cheeks burned. "It's just homework," he said, his voice tight. The officer smirked, tossing the notebook carelessly back onto the car. Pages bent, corners tore, but he didn't care. "Homework," he repeated with sarcasm, as if the word itself was ridiculous. The taller one stepped closer now, so close that the boy could feel his breath. "Take your hands out of your pockets," he barked. The boy's heart thumped loudly. His hands weren't in his pockets, but instinctively he raised them higher, palms open to show he had nothing. The movement made the bystanders across the street murmur uncomfortably. "Relax," the taller officer sneered. "Nobody's gonna hurt you. Unless you give us a reason." The words sank into the boy's chest like heavy stones. He hadn't given them a reason. There was no reason. And yet, every second felt like a trap, as if any wrong word, any wrong move, could be twisted against him. The shorter officer began patting him down, running his hands roughly along his hoodie and jeans. The boy stiffened, humiliation crawling through his skin. People were watching, neighbors, strangers, kids who had stopped playing basketball to stare. His face burned, not just with fear, but with shame. He wanted to shout, to protest, but his voice caught in his throat. "Nothing," the shorter officer muttered after finishing the search. "Clean doesn't mean he's innocent," the taller one snapped. "These kids are clever. They hide things." The boy lowered his eyes to the ground, gripping his empty bag tightly. He wanted to disappear, to sink into the pavement and escape the scene. His heart raced, his stomach twisted, but his body stayed still. Trapped under their gaze, one of the onlookers across the street shook his head in disapproval. "Leave the kid alone," he muttered softly, but too softly for the officers to hear. No one else spoke up. The fear of authority held them silent. Even as injustice unfolded before their eyes, the taller officer leaned closer, his voice sharp. "You think you're smart, walking around like you own the place. Hoodie up, music blasting. That's how trouble starts." The boy's throat tightened. "I wasn't doing anything," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Don't lie to me," the officer barked. "Don T. Play innocent. I've been on this job long enough to know when someone's hiding something." The boy's eyes stung, but he refused to let the tears fall. He stood tall, even in his fear, refusing to let them see him crumble. The shorter officer smirked again, shaking his head. "Kid thinks he's special. Let's see how special he feels down at the station." The words hit like a punch. Station, the idea of being dragged into a police car, of being treated like a criminal, terrified him. His breaths came faster, his chest tightening. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet here he was. One step away from being taken in. The crowd of onlookers grew larger, but still, no one moved. The flashing lights reflected in their eyes, reminding them of the power imbalance they could not fight. The boy's voice finally cracked. "Please, I didn't do anything." The taller officer smirked, cruel and dismissive. "That's what they all say." And in that moment, surrounded by flashing lights, mocking voices, and watching eyes, the youth realized something. To these men, his innocence didn't matter. His words didn't matter. His truth didn't matter. To them, he was already guilty of existing in the wrong place, in the wrong skin. At the wrong time, the boy stood there with his belongings scattered across the police car. His homework pages bent and dirty, his dignity stripped by their mocking words. The officers hovered over him like predators, waiting for any excuse to pounce. The taller one crossed his arms, glaring down as if daring him to fight back. The shorter one smirked, clearly enjoying the performance. The crowd of bystanders had grown. Some stood with crossed arms, shaking their heads in silence. Others held their phones in their hands, tempted to record, but afraid of what might happen if they did. The boy could feel their eyes on him, eyes filled with pity, discomfort, and quiet anger. He hated it. He hated being put on display like this, as if his worth could be measured by the way he endured humiliation. His chest heaved, his fists tightened, and for a split second, anger surged through him. He wanted to shout. He wanted to snatch his papers back, push them into his bag, and tell the officers to leave him alone. Every part of him screamed to fight the unfairness, to demand respect. But then he remembered. He remembered the warnings his parents had given him. Stay calm. Don't raise your voice. Don't make sudden moves. Your dignity is your shield. He remembered his uncle's words too, spoken at a family dinner not long ago. Justice is strongest when it comes from composure, not chaos. So, instead of exploding, he inhaled deeply. His trembling slowed. He looked up, straight into the taller officer's eyes, and spoke clearly. "I told you the truth," he said, his voice firm though soft. "I'm just walking home. That's all." The officer blinked, surprised by the calmness. He had expected fear, maybe even rage. But what stood before him was something different, quiet strength. The shorter officer scoffed. "Look at him, acting like he's above this." But the boy didn't answer. He bent down slowly, gathering his notebooks one by one. He brushed the dirt off the pages carefully, his movements steady. Each action was deliberate, controlled. He refused to let them see him flustered as he stacked his books back into his bag. The crowd grew even quieter. The boy's silence was powerful. He wasn't pleading anymore. He wasn't explaining. He was simply existing with dignity, refusing to let their cruelty define him. When he stood again, his bag hugged tightly to his chest. He looked at the officers and said, "I respect you. You wear the badge." But respect should go both ways. The words cut through the air sharper than any shout could. Even some of the bystanders gasped quietly. The taller officer stiffened. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to being spoken to calmly, with logic instead of fear. The shorter one rolled his eyes and muttered, "Big words for a kid." But his smirk wasn't as strong anymore. The boy's heart still raced. His knees felt weak. But inside, he knew he had done something important. He hadn't given them what they wanted. They wanted him rattled, broken, submissive. Instead, he had stood tall, his voice steady, his pride intact. One man in the crowd whispered to his wife, "That boy's stronger than they realize." She nodded, her eyes wet with sympathy. The officers exchanged another glance. Their mockery had lost its edge. They had pressed him, searched him, ridiculed him, but he hadn't cracked. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't lashed out. He had met their hostility with composure, and that made them uneasy. The taller officer tried again, his voice louder, as if raising it could regain the power he felt slipping away. "You think keeping calm changes anything? You think we don't see through you?" The boy didn't flinch. He adjusted the strap of his bag and answered, "You don't see me at all." Silence. Pure, heavy silence. The officer stared, but for the first time, their confidence faltered. Around them, the crowd began to shift. The people weren't laughing, weren't mocking. They were watching closely now, their expressions turning against the officers. The boy stood quietly, shoulders straight, his eyes steady. No raised fists, no insults, just dignity. He had turned their show of power into their own shame, and though the officers didn't know it yet, this calm defiance was only the beginning. Because soon one phone call would turn their arrogance into panic. But for now, on that street, in that moment, a young man had proved something powerful, even when stripped of respect. Even when cornered by authority, dignity can't be taken. It must be surrendered, and he refused to surrender it. The boy stood with his backpack clutched tightly, his books bent, his dignity intact, but his patience running thin. The officers circled him like wolves, their questions sharp, their tone mocking, their presence heavy. He had kept calm, held his ground, and refused to lose himself to anger. But inside, his chest was burning. He knew he had done nothing wrong. He knew the crowd watching could see it too. Yet still, he was being treated like a suspect, like someone who didn't belong. His mind raced. What more can I do? How do I get out of this without losing myself? And then, like a spark in the dark, a thought came. His uncle. The memory of family dinners flashed in his mind, his uncle speaking with quiet authority, his voice carrying weight, his presence commanding respect wherever he went. He was more than family. He was a leader, a protector, the kind of man people listened to when no one else could make a difference. The boy hesitated. Calling him would change everything. It felt almost unfair, like playing a card no one else had. But as the taller officer shoved his shoulder lightly and barked, "Answer me. What are you hiding?" The boy's decision was made. He reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately, pulling out his phone. The officer stiffened, hands inching toward their belts. "What are you doing?" One snapped. "I want to call my uncle," the boy said calmly. His voice didn't shake this time. The shorter officer scoffed. "Go ahead. Call your uncle. Maybe he'll tell you to behave." The taller one smirked, clearly amused. "Yeah, let's hear what Uncle has to say. Maybe he can explain why you're wandering around like a suspect." The boy didn't answer their mockery. He scrolled through his contacts, found the name, and pressed call. The ring felt like thunder in the silence of the street. Each buzz echoed in his ears. The officers still smirking, the crowd holding its breath. Then the line clicked. A deep, steady voice answered, "Hello." The boy swallowed. "Uncle, it's me." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you all right? You sound tense." The boy exhaled shakily, his eyes lowering. I was stopped by the police. They're searching me, accusing me of things I didn't do." The officers chuckled, shaking their heads. "Oh no, the poor kid called his uncle," the shorter one mocked. What's next? Is mommy on the way too? But then the boy continued. They don't know who you are. The officers froze slightly at the shift in his tone. There was silence on the line. Then his uncle's voice, firm and sharp. Put me on speaker. The boy obeyed, holding the phone up. The deep voice filled the air. This is the United States Attorney General, the man said clearly. Who am I speaking to? The smirks vanished. The officers' faces drained of color, their posture stiffening instantly. The taller one blinked, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. The shorter one lowered his eyes, his arrogance gone in an instant. The crowd gasped. Murmurs rippled through the bystanders. Attorney General. Did he say Attorney General? The boy stood straighter now, his phone still raised. His uncle's voice was calm, but carried a weight that silenced the entire street. You've detained my nephew. The Attorney General asked coldly. On what grounds? What crime has he committed? The officers exchanged panicked glances. Their earlier bravado had crumbled. The taller one stammered. He looked suspicious, sir. You were just harassing him. The Attorney General cut in. His voice thundered like a judge's gavel. My nephew is a law-abiding citizen. You've stopped him for no reason. You searched him without cause. Do you realize the violation you've just committed? The shorter officer opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to form an excuse. Sweat glistened on his forehead. The Attorney General's voice grew sharper. Stay exactly where you are. I'm calling your supervisor right now. You will explain yourselves, not to me, but to your department and the nation, if necessary. The taller officer's jaw tightened. Sir, with respect, no, the Attorney General snapped. You've shown no respect. Not to my nephew. Not to the law you swore to uphold. You will be held accountable. The phone went silent for a moment, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. The officers, once towering over the boy, now looked smaller than ever. The crowd began whispering louder, their voices tinged with awe. His uncle's the Attorney General. They messed with the wrong kid. The boy lowered the phone slowly, his heart still racing, but now filled with relief. He looked at the officers who couldn't meet his eyes anymore. Their smirks, their mocking, their arrogance had all vanished. In its place was panic, shame, and the realization that their power had limits. For the first time since the stop began, the boy felt something shift. The fear that had weighed on him lightened. He had stood with dignity. He had endured the harassment. And now, with a single call, the truth had turned the entire scene upside down. The ordinary afternoon was no longer ordinary. The stop that had begun with flashing lights and cruel voices was about to end with consequences far beyond the street. The boy zipped his backpack, his hands steadier now. The game had changed. Asterisk the moment the words U.S. Attorney General echoed through the phone speaker. The entire street seemed to freeze. The flashing lights of the patrol car still painted the pavement red and blue. But the officers' faces had gone pale, stripped of the confidence they wore only moments ago. Their smirks were gone. Their laughter died in their throats. The taller officer's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked at his partner, searching for help. But the shorter officer was no better. His eyes darted nervously between the boy, the phone, and the growing crowd. The badge on their chests, which they had used like a weapon just minutes earlier, suddenly felt heavy. The boy lowered the phone slightly, but his uncle's voice still carried power. I asked a question, the Attorney General said firmly. On what legal grounds did you detain him? The taller officer stammered. He looked suspicious, sir. We thought you thought. The Attorney General cut in, his tone sharp as a blade. Suspicion is not a crime. Being young and black is not a crime. Carrying books is not a crime. You acted without cause. Do you realize what you've done? The shorter officer swallowed hard, his earlier arrogance evaporating. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. We didn't know exactly, the Attorney General thundered. You didn't know. And that is the problem. You assumed? You harassed. You humiliated. And you did it to my nephew. The crowd began to stir now, their whispers no longer hidden. They're in trouble, someone murmured. Another voice rose louder. About time someone held them accountable. Phones were out everywhere, recording every second. The officers could feel the weight of every camera lens. Every pair of eyes. The taller officer shifted uncomfortably, beads of sweat rolling down his temple. He had been in tough situations before rowdy suspects. Violent calls, heated confrontations, but nothing like this. This wasn't a fight he could win with force or authority. This was bigger. Much bigger. The shorter officer finally spoke, his voice trembling. Sir, we didn't mean any harm. We were just doing our job, doing your job. The Attorney General's voice grew colder. Your job is to protect, not persecute. Your job is to uphold the law, not twist it to justify your prejudice. Don't you dare insult this nation by calling this harassment your job. The silence after his words was crushing. The officers shifted on their feet like guilty children caught in a lie. The crowd's murmurs grew into a low rumble. A tide of disapproval that pressed against the officers from every side. The boy stood quietly. His chest still tight, but now the fear that had gripped him earlier was loosening. For the first time since the stop began, the power no longer felt one-sided. He wasn't the one on trial anymore, they were. The Attorney General continued, his voice unwavering. Stay where you are. I've contacted your supervisor. He will meet you on that street, and you will answer for this. The taller officer's face drained of color. Sir, please, no, the Attorney General snapped. Don't beg me. Save it for your department. Save it for the report, and save it for the public. Because this story will not disappear into silence. The crowd gasped at his words, their excitement growing. This was no longer just about one boy. It was about accountability. It was about justice. The bystanders knew they were witnessing something rare to officers so used to being untouchable, now caught in the grip of their own mistake. The boy glanced at the faces around him. Where there had once been pity, now there was admiration. Where there had once been silent fear, now there was quiet pride. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't fought. Yet he had turned the situation on its head with composure, truth, and a single phone call. The officers, however, were unraveling. Their hands fidgeted at their sides, their voices faltered, and their authority crumbled in real time. The taller one looked at the boy, his glare now gone, replaced by something else, shame. The shorter one shifted his weight, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. The Attorney General's final words rang through the phone. Your abuse of power ends today. Do not move until your supervisor arrives. The phone clicked, the line going silent. But his voice still echoed in their ears, impossible to escape. The crowd erupted into whispers and muffled cheers. The boy slipped his phone back into his pocket, his hand steady. He stood taller now, his shoulders squared, his face calm. The roles had reversed completely. The officers who once towered over him now looked small, cornered by their own arrogance. Shock had gripped them first. Panic held them now, and soon consequences would follow. The boy said nothing more. He didn't need to. The silence between them said it all. The minutes that followed felt like hours. The patrol car's lights still flashed, painting the street in red and blue, but their meaning had changed. They no longer felt like symbols of authority. They felt like spotlights exposing guilt. The two officers stood stiffly. their backs straight, their jaws tight, trying to maintain some semblance of control. But the sweat on their brows and the tremor in their voices betrayed them. They weren't in control anymore. They were waiting for judgment. The boy remained calm. He stood with his backpack clutched against his chest, his books safe again inside. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply stood in silence. The same silence that had carried him through humiliation and now carried him through vindication. The crowd thickened. More neighbors had stepped out of their homes. More passersby had stopped to watch. Phones were raised everywhere, recording every detail. The officers knew these videos would spread fast. And with the Attorney General involved, their names and faces would not be forgotten. Then, the sound of another vehicle broke the tense air. A black SUV pulled up, its engine low and steady. From it stepped a man in a crisp uniform, his expression hard. The precinct supervisor, the crowd parted slightly, murmuring with anticipation. The two officers straightened immediately, their faces tight with forced professionalism. "Report," the supervisor barked, his tone sharp, his eyes cold. The taller officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we stopped this youth because he looked suspicious. We conducted a search without probable cause." The supervisor cut him off. His glare was enough to silence the man mid-sentence. The shorter officer tried to intervene. "Sir, we were just ensuring." "Ensuring what?" The supervisor snapped. His voice carried across the street. "Ensuring that you humiliated an innocent teenager in front of half the neighborhood. Ensuring that you ignored every principle of lawful conduct. Do you realize who you've just harassed?" The officers froze, their faces draining of color again. The supervisor turned toward the boy, his expression softening slightly. "Son, are you all right?" The boy nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. I just want to go home." The supervisor's jaw tightened. He turned back to his men. Home. That's all he wanted. And you couldn't even allow him that dignity. His voice thundered now, each word cutting deeper. "Do you know who his uncle is?" The taller officer stammered. We didn't know." "You didn't need to know," the supervisor barked. "His rights are not based on his family connections. His rights are his, period. But since you've chosen to abuse your badges today, you'll answer not only to me, but to Washington itself." The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices tinged with satisfaction. Justice was being spoken out loud, and they were witnessing it. The shorter officer lowered his head, his arrogance shattered. The taller one clenched his jaw, shame burning in his face. Both of them had built their authority on intimidation. But now that authority had crumbled into dust. The supervisor's tone dropped lower, colder. "You will surrender your badges and weapons right now. Internal affairs will handle the rest. Consider yourselves suspended effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones zoomed in closer. The officers, once towering with false power, now fumbled with their belts. Slowly, with trembling hands, they unpinned their badges and placed them in the supervisor's waiting palm. Their guns followed, handed over like the surrender of defeated soldiers. The boy watched quietly, his eyes steady. He didn't smile, didn't mock them as they had mocked him. His dignity was louder than their downfall. The supervisor glanced at him once more. "You've shown remarkable composure today. More composure than the men who were supposed to protect you. Your uncle will hear everything from me directly. Now, go home. You've been through enough." The boy nodded, adjusting his backpack. He turned slowly, his steps steady, his head high. The crowd parted for him as he walked, some clapping softly, others whispering words of encouragement. He didn't need applause. He didn't need cheers. His dignity was victory enough. Behind him, the officers stood stripped of their power, their heads lowered, their future uncertain. Accountability had arrived, swift and undeniable, and the boy, once ridiculed and harassed, now walked away free, not just free in body, but free in spirit, carrying with him the strength of having faced injustice and emerged unbroken. Asterisk, the street slowly returned to its rhythm, but nothing about it felt the same. The flashing patrol lights dimmed as the disgraced officers were escorted away, their heads bowed, their badges gone. The crowd lingered, buzzing with whispers, replaying every detail of what they had just witnessed. Some still held their phones high, recording until the very last moment. Others just stood quietly, letting the weight of the event sink in. At the center of it all was the boy. His backpack hung on his shoulder, his notebooks tucked safely inside again. He didn't look like someone who had won a battle, yet there was something unshakable in his posture. He had been harassed, mocked, and humiliated, but he had never surrendered his dignity. Neighbors approached him as he walked. A woman carrying groceries placed a gentle hand on his arm. "You did good, son," she said softly. "You stayed calm. That's strength." Another man nodded firmly. "You taught them something today." We all saw it. The boy gave small nods, thanking them quietly. He wasn't interested in being a hero. All he had wanted was to walk home in peace. Yet now, his simple act of composure, combined with his uncle's powerful voice, had turned into something much larger, a lesson for everyone watching by the time he reached his block. The story had already begun spreading. Phones buzzed, videos uploaded, comments poured in. Strangers across the city and, soon across the country would see what happened. They would see the cruelty of unchecked power. But more importantly, they would see the power of restraint, of dignity, of truth at home. His mother hugged him tightly at the door. She had heard about the incident before he even arrived. Her hands trembled as she held his face, scanning him for any signs of harm. When she saw none, she exhaled deeply. "You've stayed strong," she whispered, pride shining through her tears. Later that evening, his uncle called again. The Attorney General's voice was calm, but carried pride. "You showed more strength today than many grown men could. You didn't let their hate make you hateful. That's what true power looks like. And because of that, justice will follow. Not just for you, but for every young person who deserves to walk free without fear." The boy listened quietly, his heart swelling. He realized something important. His uncle's title had saved him, but it was his own calm that had carried him through until that moment. Without it, things might have ended very differently. Days turned into weeks, but the story didn't fade. The videos went viral. News stations replayed the footage. Commentators debated, activists rallied, and voices across the country demanded reform. The two officers faced not just suspension, but public disgrace. Their actions held up as an example of what abuse of authority looked like. For the boy, life slowly returned to normal. He still walked home with his backpack, still listened to music, still stopped to wave at neighbors. But those who saw him now looked at him differently. They didn't just see a student. They saw resilience. They saw a reminder of what it meant to stay composed when the world tried to strip you of your worth. The gym on the corner, the market down the block, the school he attended, all of them carried whispers of his story. His calm dignity had become a symbol, and though he didn't ask for it, he had become an example for others his age. Proof that silence can be powerful, that patience can be strength, and that truth always finds a way to rise. The lesson lingered most in the minds of those who had watched it happen. The neighbors, the bystanders, the ones who had felt powerless to intervene to them, carried the memory. They remembered the arrogance of the officers, the fear in the boy's eyes, the phone call that changed everything, and the way justice had walked into their street like a storm. But above all, they remembered the boy's dignity, the way he had refused to crumble, the way he had looked his oppressors in the eyes and spoken softly but firmly, Respect should go both ways. Years later, people still told the story. Not of the officers who lost their badges. Not even of the attorney general who had stepped in with power, but of the boy who stood tall when it mattered most. Because sometimes the greatest lessons aren't shouted. They're lived. And on that ordinary afternoon, in that ordinary neighborhood, an innocent boy turned humiliation into history simply by refusing to let anyone take away his dignity.